All right, we are back on the podcast where we are training men in spiritual fitness. And if you have been following along with us for this past series, a few weeks ago, Joe and I released a series, and sometimes Andy, he was with us, released a series of episodes on discipling men of different generations. Gen X, Gen Z, boomers, millennials. What are the unique traits and the differences between some of these generations? Specifically, we wanted to aim at how do we identify opportunities to disciple men within these generations? What are the challenges that come with that? And I feel like the series went well. Maybe a week or so after, got a text from a friend, a fellow pastor, who said, "Hey, that was a great series. But most churches aren't made up of like just one generation. If you're discipling men, you're putting all these generations into one room together. So are you and Joe going to do another episode on how to disciple a group of men that have all the generations in it?" And I said, "No, absolutely not. But you can do it." And so, so that's what I have with me today, my friend Jason Wood, who, has been listening along, following along, and said, "You know what? I think you've got some insight to offer here on this idea of generation." So let me just start here, Jason. What was it about this past series that maybe intrigued you, and why is it that you're wrestling with that idea of discipling men in all different generations within one group?
Well, I think the first lesson we need to take away is don't ask Evan questions about podcast episodes you'd like to hear, or otherwise you're going to end up recording one.
It's so true.
Um,
Yes.
no, I thought it was really helpful. So I've been a pastor here outside of New Orleans, near where you are, Evan. Well, you know where my church is, for over 14 years now. And as a small church pastor, I am always engaged with the work of discipleship. And over the last 2 years, I've really been trying to lean into discipling the men of our church intentionally. Um, but to do that, I'm interacting with guys whose experience is not mine,
Hmm.
and particularly, I grew up with boomer parents. I'm an elder millennial, so I know how to relate to them.
Yeah.
As an elder millennial, I get along with Gen X pretty well, but I think the silent generation and Gen Z are it's different for me to be in that discipleship relationship with them. And so listening to the series was enlightening, just to kind of help me think through um, how they view themselves, how they view the world. So I thought it was useful, but at the end I was like, but how do I synthesize all this? Like if I had 12 Gen Z guys, I could,
Yes. Yeah.
just look at TikTok or something and work with them through that. But I'm dealing with a Gen Z guy next to a silent generation guy,
Yeah.
and so it's that's where the question came
Yeah.
from.
And so I think there are, and guys that are involved in men's discipleship experience this. No, okay, there are some unique challenges that come to putting silent generation, Gen Z, millennials, Gen X, all of them in one room. There are a lot of differences
Yeah.
between them. So we'll go there, but let's think about just the opportunities and the strengths of taking a group of men that are coming from different generations, different stages of life, and putting them in a discipleship relationship together. So
Yeah.
what, as opposed to, because you could just, yeah, okay, all the 20-something-year-old guys in the church, you're going to have a group. All of the 30s and 40s, you're going to have a group. All the 50s, we could do that. But why? What are the strengths or the opportunities there of mixing some of those up?
Yeah. Well, I mean, to begin with, when I got to my church 14 years ago,
Mhm.
everyone was pretty much was silent generation. There were a
Hmm.
handful outside of that. And when you look at that from the outside looking in, you would say that's probably not a healthy church.
Yeah.
There, we need some kind of diversity here. For that group, here's a group of people packed with wisdom, but
Yeah.
no energy, right? It's
Yeah.
just like if your church is all 20 somethings, that's a concern too. All energy and no wisdom, and so I think that um, men need each other intergenerationally. And so it's been a heart of ours at Faith to have an intergenerational church where we are encouraged, rather than splitting people up, uh, trying to integrate them as much as possible,
Hmm.
so that they can rely on each other. And that adds complexity for sure. But I think the benefits are worth it. And I'm not saying like it's inappropriate to split up into affinity
Yeah.
groups or different
Yeah.
age groups, but I think there's a real benefit to doing discipleship. I think the first is, I know Joe talks about this in his book, The Path Forward.
Hmm.
Um, Kind of the idea of a band of brothers. Like if you watch Band of Brothers, you go back and watch that classic series. Like you got the young grunts that are out there, but they're also relying on commanding officers.
That's right.
And I think older men help younger men gain perspective and objectivity that they don't have, because they've been there, they've done that. That's a discipleship I can't do.
Hmm.
I'm 41, right? There's only so much wisdom I can give to a Gen Z guy. And so when you have a group of men that span not just age groups, but also spiritual maturity, there's discipleship that happens across the table too between them. So that's the first thing is I think having some diversity there helps with the developing a strong band of brothers. Secondly, I think that men across age groups can pray for each other and keep each other accountable in different ways. So, like a good example, so guys in their 20s or 30, like in an age group, they might be able to talk about sin struggles in a more honest way,
Hmm.
like how a
Yeah.
20-year-old guy is struggling with pornography or something
Hmm.
is probably very different from a 70-year-old's experience. So, maybe that's, but old men just have a way of speaking the truth that young men need to hear.
Yeah.
And so there's some accountability there. But I also think that older men gain perspective from the young as well, both on the world, and on their own family.
Hmm.
They think differently about their kids and grandkids as they're interacting with these young Christians. So I think there's some interesting things that happen in prayer and accountability among guys of different ages.
Hmm.
And that's something I've been seeing at Faith. It's interesting to watch it occur. But altogether, like there's just cross pollination that happens that I think we benefit from when we're keeping different age groups together. It doesn't have to be all the time, but I think there's a real benefit to it.
Yeah, I identify so much with a couple of things you said there. One, a personal experience of about 2 or 3 years ago now. So I don't know, I'm 41, 42. Once you get to this age, I don't exactly remember. I'm somewhere, somewhere in the early 40s. Uh, but so a few years ago, I'm in this phase of life where there's, that midlife crisis type of thing.
Hmm.
And, I just so happened God brought into my life and into my small group discipleship a young man in his 20s, who was on fire and energetic. The energy of that young man carried me through in ways that I probably don't even recognize how impactful that was. Like I can look back now and say, wow, his energy and excitement is really, it really re-energized me in a
Yeah.
time of life when I was feeling dull and complacent and just uh, lost in some ways. This young man who had all the energy in the world and all the excitement in the world and couldn't wait to show up for discipleship and couldn't wait to do all these things. It's like it rubbed off on me. It rubbed
Yeah.
off on me. And I
Yeah.
think that's part of the advantage there is those, like you said, the older men need that energy to rub off on them to be reminded of what it's like to be excited about discipleship again.
The group I'm leading right now, there's a guy in there who I guess he's probably about 70, and he said this in a public group, so I can share this, at the church recently, that in the men's group, he said, I'm learning and growing from men half my age, and that inspired him.
Yes.
He's like, if these guys have this relationship with Jesus, I can go there too. Which you
Yes.
you would think they might think, oh, I've missed it, I missed the boat, and he's like, no, 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 I can do this. And so it's
Hmm.
neat to watch that happen.
Hmm. Hmm.
So yeah, it's
Yeah,
great.
I think in the same way, and part of what you were saying is like when you have these different generations, I think it inspires and sets you up for compassion and
Yeah,
empathy in a way. There's a certain way in which all we can see is life and problems through the lens of ourself and our own phase of life. But when you start to hear the problems of men in their 60s and 70s
Yeah.
or men in their 20s or whatever, all of a sudden, your neighbors start to make more sense to you. You know, when you're in those discipleship
Yeah.
relationships, all of a sudden, the things that your neighbors are going through that seem foreign to you, it's like, wait a second, I can identify that, I can see that, but I wouldn't have seen it otherwise unless I was in an intimate relationship with a guy like that.
I can't remember which of the podcasts it was where you guys were y'all are cutting the grass with me, so that it's kind of jumbled up in my head. But one of the podcasts you talked about, it may have been Gen X, kind of grappling with the reality, I'm going to die.
Yeah.
That kind of looms
Hmm.
large. Um, as a pastor, so I was first called as a pastor when I was 27.
Hmm.
Starting at 27, I'm sitting with people as they're dying, and so
Oof.
the reality of death is something that's
Mhm.
more apparent to me than probably most people.
Mhm.
I think it's just to reiterate what you're saying. I think it's useful for all generations to be talking to these guys they're dealing with. Man, I'm having a hard time walking around. I'm losing my sense of independence, and I'm grieving that. It reminds us of reality. Like
Yeah.
we're all ultimately dependent. We don't have control. We are going
Hmm.
to die. Your time is limited, so live it. you
Yes.
know,
Do it.
um,
Yes.
so there's perspective to be gained in those relationships.
Yeah, I love it. Okay, so now let's talk about some of the challenges. You got a group of men, each generation does have their own unique traits, went through even just culturally different things
Yeah.
that taints their worldview in a certain way. All right, so you put all these men into one small group situation, discipleship group situation. What are the challenges that we can expect? What are some of the challenges that you've seen?
Well, before we get to the challenges, I'll tell you this. I think discipleship is a process of just going after a man's heart.
Hmm.
Um, and you have to be sensitive to the work of the Holy Spirit in
Hmm.
them. So the way I approached this year, I last September, I guess, yes, it was a year ago. I started praying daily for maybe 2 or 3 months that the Lord would clearly give me a group of men that He wanted to grow,
Hmm.
men that His Holy Spirit wanted to lead along a path.
Hmm.
And so, after spending all that time in prayer, my strategy was don't beg anybody.
Hmm.
I don't want anybody that is not primed and ready by the Holy Spirit.
Okay.
So I announced it one time in church. There was no follow up. There was no 2 days before the meeting happened. I texted all the men, every man in the church,
Hmm.
one on one, and I said, "Hey, I've got this discipleship thing. I'd really love you to come Wednesday at 6 a.m. Be there." And that was that. And
Yeah.
so I wasn't going to go out because maybe you've done this, Evan. You'll like plead with a guy, oh, come to this thing. Well, then he comes and he doesn't read the book and he doesn't do the thing. Is da 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 da.
Oh yeah.
I did, so and we've had guys that have had to drop out for providential reasons. We've had other guys who are like, oh wow, I didn't realize this was going to be so heavy. I don't know if I can commit this. That's fine. It
Yeah.
doesn't hurt my feelings. Um, but that's where I started. So I didn't have some grand strategy of I didn't pick special guys. I
Mhm.
just prayed.
Hmm.
And so I would say start with that, just pray, and whoever you get, trust the Lord. But there have been some challenges along the way. I think the first hurdle, this one anyone could guess, is that we because of the differences in generations, you don't always get what each other's talking about.
Yeah.
Um, but that's my job as the pastor is to translate that,
Hmm.
especially somebody that knows all of them. And so that's not been a terrible hurdle for us. I think the second hurdle, and I'll be frank, I don't think we totally cracked this nut this year, is it took a long time to develop trust and connection.
Yeah.
Some of that I think may have just been the format. It was only a monthly meeting, which is barely enough, I think, to really do in-depth discipleship with guys. And I kind of wish we had like sweated together, or cooked meat, or
Yeah.
done some things that guys do to bond.
Yes.
But one of the things that I did was I split them up into pods of like 2 or 3 and encouraged them to be praying for each other and staying in touch with each other.
Yeah.
The ones that did that were the most successful in this
Mm.
regard.
Hmm.
Like I found out they were talking to each other through the week. They were praying for each other. They were talking at church about the challenges we were doing. So we were doing Joe's decathlon program.
Okay. Yeah.
And so the guys that were intentional about it, they got the most out of it. But,
Hmm.
going back, I probably would want to create some space for them to develop trust. And one of the guys said, he suggested maybe even less time on task in the group meeting, just 15 minutes,
Oh,
just catching up. How's life? What's going on? How's work? Da
yeah.
da da.
Yeah.
So that would be another hurdle. I, the last one I'll mention, I don't think this is a distinctly Presbyterian problem, but I know we have a problem with it, is that we love class. And
Yeah.
so it's easy for any kind of gathering of men just to become another exercise in learning. Discipleship is about the heart.
Yeah.
It is about your love for Christ, your love for your neighbor. And if it's not converting to action, it's not discipleship.
Yeah.
It's learning, and learning's good. But there's always that tendency, if it's in a church or in a nonprofit, that it
Hmm.
can become that sort of a thing. But that's any kind of that's any discipleship, not
That's
just this.
anything. Yeah. Yeah. So much of what you're saying there in the challenges comes down to relationship. But one
Hmm.
of the biggest challenges is also one of the biggest strengths of a men's discipleship group. It's good relationships. And it is a challenge to get men of different generations to connect relationally, either by having a shared experience, like you're talking about, sweat together, do something, setting them up for that is huge. Without that, it's hard to connect that relationship. But also just the isolation of men and the siloing within the different generations. But for me personally, one of the biggest challenges is just getting those relationships with different other men. In other words, more specifically, recruiting men
Hmm.
of different generations. Particularly in my context, we've got a lot of men in our church of about the same age.
Hmm.
We don't have the silence. We barely. I don't even know if we have any boomers. I don't think we do. So we're missing a couple of generations there, and I just
Yeah.
don't think that's healthy. I don't think
Hmm.
that's good. So, but I'm stuck. I do feel like I could say, how do I recruit, these silents and these boomers if I don't have any boomers or silents? If
Yeah.
they visit, they don't want to stay because there's no one like them,
Yeah.
and so then you remain stuck. And it's kind of similar in some ways to what you're saying you stepped into as a young man you stepped into a church that was all silent generation and
Yeah.
no Gen Z millennial, none of that. But this is a challenge. This is a problem, is when you really want to create these intergenerational groups, but no one exists within one of the generations. Just, human nature, we don't tend to join an organization or anything where there's not someone like us. We just
Yeah.
don't want to be around that. And so then you just kind of remain stuck and you miss the wisdom of the older generation or the energy of the younger generation, or somewhere in between. So
Yeah.
that's a legit challenge, and I haven't solved it yet. So
Well, just spitballing here, but I do wonder if churches have relationships amongst themselves.
Hmm.
If other church, so would it be ideal for you to have more silent generation people at your church? Yeah, but you don't. Okay, so in God's providence, that's how it is. So we have to
Yeah.
accept that for now.
Mhm.
But is there another church locally that has a solid discipleship minded silent generation guy who could come in and share his wisdom with your people? I think that'd be a shot in the arm.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so, and you and I have worked on some of this stuff here locally, like
Hmm.
cultivating these relationships between churches. There are churches that are resourced. This is the thing to think about. Having a church full of silent generation people means you are over resourced in that area. You have a huge opportunity to share wisdom with another church that doesn't have that,
That's so
right?
good.
So, and frankly, they may need some of the Gen Z people at your church to come help them with their yards.
Yes. It's
so,
true. It's true.
so that's one of the things we talked about with North Shore Gospel Network is just
Yeah.
how do we use the resources that are in the body of Christ at large to be of benefit to the other churches, because we're all doing the same thing. We're seeking the same ends, which is the
Really
glory of
good.
Christ.
That's really
So,
good. That's really good. Yes, yes. See, I love that an insight of seeing them as a resource. All right,
yeah,
look at survey the kind of guys you have. They're the resources God has providentially given you. How do you best use them to make disciples in your
right.
context? And that's the community-wide thing, not just limited to one congregation. So that's a great point of view there. All right, so just more broadly speaking here, because you and I have had a lot of conversations over the past couple of years about men's discipleship. It's something we're both excited about. What's working for you? Like, especially when we start thinking about these groups of generations, what do you see in your church, in your context, that's working?
Well, I don't want to overblow what's going on at Faith. When we got there were a lot of silent generation folks. We have grown primarily with millennials and Gen X.
Hmm.
And so, like, when you look at, if you were to do like a chart, like a bell curve or whatever, we have very few Gen Z. We have
Hmm.
very few boomers. We
Hmm.
have lots of babies. I think they're called Gen Alpha, maybe. We have
Yeah.
lots of them, lots of millennials, Gen X, and still a silent generation. And so what I've seen, and I noticed this in high school, growing up in Memphis, is that there's something about, as an elder millennial, my let's call it religious preferences
Hmm.
are very similar to my grandparents.
Hmm. Interesting.
Um, and you can watch it,
Interesting.
in the early 2000s, you saw kind of this increased interest in liturgy and
Yeah.
church history,
Hmm.
creeds, and all that sort of thing.
Yeah.
Return to hymns. I mean, Joe's wrote a book on it. Have I plugged all of Joe's books yet?
You're doing
They're
really
not
good.
paying me. I
Yeah.
promise you, they're not paying me. But there's some interesting cultural touch points. I don't know if it's that our parents were boomers and their kids were boomers and that we're just rebelling against. I don't know what it is,
Right.
but I find that those two groups get along swimmingly well.
Yeah.
And there will be some areas where they disagree, but like theologically and liturgically and politically, there's a lot of like interesting connection points between those groups.
Yeah.
So
Huh.
they get along better than you might think they would when you get them in a room together. So
Hmm.
that's something that's worked well, and just something I'm observing. I also think that men, and y'all talked about this before, but men are desperately lonely,
Yeah.
and they're made for friends. It's
Hmm.
not good for man to be alone.
Hmm.
And what's interesting is, so we live in very divided times. We argue about everything under the sun. Guess what? God made men to endure conflict. We actually
Hmm.
kind of like to fight a little bit. And what's even more interesting is that unregenerate men that need Jesus are also lonely. So
Yeah.
in that COVID era, I remember the first young man from our church that came over to my house in the pre-COVID times. Guys would come over for an hour, hour and a half, hang out, and they'd head home. It was like we're at like 3 hours, and I was like, "Why is this guy not going home?" And I was like, "Oh, he's lonely." And since then, I've just seen like guys want to hang out, and
Yeah.
so this is just discipleship and frankly evangelism. It's just
Yeah.
hanging out. Just hang
Yes.
out with the people, enjoy each
Yeah.
other, talk about life, talk about real things. So guys want this already. So
Hmm.
if you have an inclination to do something like this, guys are going to show up. You're not going to have trouble with that. But
Yes.
the biggest challenge I find when it comes to both discipleship and evangelism with men is as the leader of it, keeping my eye on the prize of the men's hearts
Uh,
rather than the activity. So for years I've said the thing that brings men together is often the thing that keeps them apart. And so if whatever you're doing with them is, if you're doing like a sports thing, you're hunting or gaming. I'm a nerd, as you can see from the stuff I hunt.
yes.
This that thing can easily distract. The enemy's going to use whatever he can to
Yeah.
keep you from going after a man's heart and asking him real
Yeah.
questions about his marriage and his
Yeah.
work and his loves and all that sort of thing.
Hmm.
And so that's always going to be a something I have to grapple with, is how do I keep my eye on the main thing and not get distracted.
That's
Um,
really good.
so
Yeah.
yeah.
No, that's really good. And I mean, you've hit exactly where we find ourselves in this cultural moment. Yeah, we've talked a lot on the podcast before about male loneliness and things like that because the stats are there. I mean, yeah, men have 50% fewer relationships than women. Two-thirds of men between the ages of 18 and 23 say no one really knows me. two
Yeah.
thirds of that age group of men.
That's
So it's just,
heartbreaking.
yeah, it's very hard. That's exactly right. It just saddens me deeply every time I read these stats, because these are our neighbors. These are even sometimes the men in our own congregations. And they are sitting there desperate for a relationship. And so that's, yeah, if we can do anything to begin to invite guys in, like you said, they'll stay at your house for 3 hours because they're just, they just want a relationship. And so sometimes it's just creating these opportunities. That's what a lot of men's discipleship is about, is how can I create an environment in
Yeah.
which men feel both comfortable and challenged by relationship alongside other men that are headed in the same direction in life. And so it's, as a pastor, a church leader, as a men's discipleship guy, it's just creating those environments, those spaces, those places where that can exist. And yeah, it looks different in all different contexts and
Mhm.
in different churches, different communities. I'd be curious to know from you, like if you had the opportunity, and maybe you've done this at your church in the past, to create an event that would recruit men of all different generations and get them connected and maybe even on a path of discipleship. What has that looked like in your church, or how would you dream that up? This type of event that sets men up for success.
Yeah. I know y'all talked about in the Boomer one the men's breakfast
Yeah.
idea. Dudes love food, and
Yes.
if it's good enough, they'll still come. And so now I I had inherited a men's breakfast when I first got here, but it died out over time.
Okay.
And so the re-engagement with breakfast, I think, was that's when we meet.
Yeah.
I whatever I would do, there would have to be food. But what's funny, years ago, we started just a men's social night once a month.
Hmm.
And the first guy that hosted it, it was great. He told everybody, bring whatever you want. I'll have food too. We walked into his kitchen and there was a plate on the bar there and it was just a pile of bacon. I think he had cooked like 200 strips of bacon. That was the food he provided.
That's a
And the
win.
guys, what was crazy was like every guy that walked in was like, awesome. So men are
Perfect.
we're not terribly complicated. So I've not been a big event guy with no one would even say we have a men's ministry,
Yeah.
but guys get together to eat, and then we have a once a month social gathering over at a guy's house where usually there'll be some snacks or something, and we just
Mhm.
hang around and enjoy each other.
I mean, yeah, I think you nailed it. It's a clear invitation into something particular, a particular place and time where other men are going to be. So you mark out that loneliness piece, you mark out the intentionality of gathering people for something. Food never hurts, it's always a bonus. I find that anytime you can add a shared experience of any
Yeah.
sort, that is a bonding thing. You talk about a band of brothers. How do you build a band of brothers? It's through shared experience, whether that
Mm,
be, yeah, sweating together, building something, or going out and whatever, golfing, hunting, you name it, whatever. Now, you can't make that the main thing and the only thing you do, obviously. But that, if you want to start relationships and get men to begin on that path of growth, that's it. But I also say, I mean, if you're really looking for the best event or the best thing you can do to get men of all different generations in one context for the purpose of discipleship, it's the local church, right?
yeah.
This is
Yeah. Yeah.
this is it. This is what we do, and this is part of what drives me nuts in some of the men's ministry world is that there's a lot of guys out there that are looking for a organization or something that they can go to, someone they can go to and say, "Give me an opportunity for discipleship." And you ask them, "Have you engaged in your church at all?" "Oh, well, I'm in between churches, or I don't go to church."
Yeah.
Well, you've completely missed the boat. Your best opportunity is your local church. That's supposed to be intergenerational discipleship alongside one another. It's just not more complicated than that. We have
Yeah.
no need to complicate it more than to tell men, go get involved in your local church.
Yeah.
And that is what it looks like to get in a group of men that are across generations and be on a path of discipleship together.
I
Uh,
mean, maybe there's a challenge there that, you know, guys have been a part of churches and found them wanting in that regard.
yeah.
And I don't think that's always the case when I talk to people and have those kinds of conversations. But if that's the case, go back to your pastor or to whatever, you know, your leadership team and say, listen, I need someone to disciple me. Did I miss it somewhere? Like, maybe you do need to go to a different church, but
Yeah.
before you do that, I would go back and call them to faithfulness in this regard. And the reality is, like, I've had seasons where I wasn't doing very intentional men's discipleship in
Mm.
our church, but if I'd had a guy come and say, I want that, I would be like, dude, now let's go.
Yeah.
So you might be surprised what's available in the church if you just ask.
Mm. That's good. Well, one final problem that I have, Jason, that's that I really enjoyed this. So you're probably gonna have to come back and do this again with me sometime.
Well, you know where I live. You know
I
how to get a
do.
hold of me.
Your church is, I could literally walk to your church. I mean,
Yeah,
it's right down the road from me, and you don't live too far from me either. But
that's right.
no, thank you for taking the time to join me here and to push me a little bit and say, hey, wait, we didn't finish the picture here. There was more to talk about than just saying, hey, there's unique traits of each generation. So I think this gave us a more complete picture of what men's discipleship is, and hopefully equip some guys to do this within their church and community. So I hope you guys enjoyed it, and I hope you'll join us next time on the Cross Training Ministries podcast.